It's taken months, but Zimbabwe's main opposition has decided that it will join forces with President Robert Mugabe in a unity government. Announcing the move, MDC leader Morgan Tsvangirai said the time had come to prioritize the welfare of the people. But there are signs that not everyone in the MDC is happy.
Well, it comes as the cholera epidemic in Zimbabwe exceeds what the World Health Organization called its worst-case scenario of 60,000 cases.
Well, the cholera epidemic started in August last year. By the end of December, 1,551 people had died. And the number of suspected cases had reached nearly 31,000.
Well, over the last month, the death rate has accelerated sharply to 3,161. And more than 60,000 people are suspected of having the disease. From Bulawayo, Haru Matasa sent this report.
Possibly an end to Zimbabwe's political stalemate. Opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai finally agrees to join forces with his rival, Robert Mugabe. But the issues that have so far held up forming a unity government are still there. Opposition supporters are still in police detention, and allocation of key government posts isn't resolved yet. But Tsvangirai says he will sign on the dotted line, saying he will push the regional body SADC to iron out outstanding issues.
The National Council hereby resolves, 1, to restate its commitment to the global political agreement signed on the 11th September 2008 and to commit to be part of the inclusive government.
Now that the political stalemate seems to be over, politicians can now focus on the growing humanitarian crisis in the country. Cholera has killed more than 3,000 people, and the World Health Organization says more than 60,000 people are infected, and things are getting worse.
There's a key need to improve social awareness around the country amongst communities, so people know how best to prevent themselves from contracting the disease, as well as knowing what to do when they feel they've contracted it.
Food is in short supply, and the Zimbabwe dollar is worthless, with people preferring to use the US dollar or the South African rand to buy basic commodities. But even after Morgan Tsvangirai is sworn in as Prime Minister, many Zimbabweans are wondering if this government of national unity is actually going to work. Morgan Tsvangirai has said time and time again that he doesn't trust President Robert Mugabe. So what makes this situation any different? Haru Matasa, Aljazeera, Zimbabwe.
Right, for more on this, let's speak to Lance Guma, who's a Zimbabwean journalist based here in London. Thank you very much for joining us. We heard Haru Matasa there. What's different this time? I mean, the timing as well is quite interesting. The elections were back in March. I mean, why now?
Well, I think there have been a lot of humanitarian concerns weighing on the opposition. But I think the regional leaders who are in the SADC grouping are to blame for putting pressure on Morgan Tsvangirai, who won the elections in March, instead of Robert Mugabe, who lost.
These humanitarian issues have been going on for quite some time, though. It doesn't explain the change that happened in the past few days.
Well, I think the dynamics that were developing was that even if the opposition had not gone into this agreement, there was a very good chance Mugabe was going to go it alone and unilaterally form his own government, and he would have had the blessing of SADC. So Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDC risked a situation where they were isolated by the regional grouping and would probably only have support from Western countries.
The problem is that a lot of the issues that were dividing the MDC and Zanu PF are still not resolved, especially the handing out of the various ministries.
Yeah, Mugabe has only made concessions, I think, on 3 out of the 5 key demands that they had. And those concessions are not really significant. I mean, provincial governors, the National Security Bill, and a few other concessions. The key issue, which was the allocation of the Home Affairs Ministry, which controls a lot of things, the voting, the police, births, passports, that was key for the MDC to reassure their supporters who've gone through a lot of violence that this would come to an end. So I suppose for them it's a case of half a loaf is better than none, and they're hoping to work from within the system to try and change things in Zimbabwe.
What leverage do you think Tsvangirai has now? Because, for example, as you mentioned, he does have the support of the West. The US has made it clear that it would be willing to give Zimbabwe aid if Tsvangirai is a part of that. How do you think he's going to use that to his advantage?
Well, it's very clear. We had elections in March, and then we had the one-man June runoff. Mugabe hasn't formed a government since, and knowing how arrogant he is at times, he would have gone on his own and formed a government if he did not need the MDC. But the fact that he has waited this long, almost 10 months, shows the value that he is attaching to the opposition to join this government. So a lot of people are making the argument that he needs the MDC as window dressing to try and get international acceptance for his government.
We're hearing some pretty shocking figures coming out of Zimbabwe. 60,000 people are believed to have contracted cholera, and the currency is essentially not being used. Now the US dollar and the South African currency is being used. That's quite an admission of defeat from Mugabe himself, who for a long time claimed that Zimbabwe was essentially okay.
Yeah, and it's funny you should make that argument, because those opposed to this deal are actually saying Mugabe was at his weakest and the opposition should have just held out for a bit longer.
Well, let me just pick you up on that point, because a lot of members of the MDC don't necessarily support what Tsvangirai has done. Do you think that he'll be able to call on the support of his entire party?
Well, like any political party, I don't think it's very difficult. It's very easy to have people thinking the same. There is a large constituency within the MDC that is opposed to this deal. And the funny thing is, both sides have very good arguments for joining and for not joining. And I suppose at the end of the day, it is Tsvangirai's popularity within the party that has carried the day, because I think Tsvangirai made the decision to join this government, and it was just a matter of him influencing his other colleagues to join. But it's a sad day for democracy, like a lot of people are arguing, because you have influential African leaders basically rewarding thuggery. Mugabe used violence to retain power, and it seems the strategy has worked.
Lance Guma, Zimbabwean journalist based here in London, thank you very much.